People ask me when they learn that I spent 30 years standing still, whether it was hard, whether the cold got into my bones at the ironwood gate, whether my legs ached, whether the long summer heat under the bearskin ever made me sway. They think the difficulty of my old trade was the body. They are wrong about that, the way most people are wrong about most things they have not done. The body learns its silence in the first winter and never forgets it. The body is the easy part. Hard part is the mind. The hard part is what passes behind a face that is not permitted to change. I stood at that gate through 3 rains and 1,000 small storms, and behind the unmoving face I can tell you I was a busy man. I watched everything. I weighed everything. I judged a great many people who never once suspected they were being judged, because a statue does not judge, and I had trained myself to look like a statue. That is the secret of the post, if there is a secret. You are not a wall. You only look like a wall. And the day the rich man came to the ironwood gate to buy me, he made the oldest mistake a powerful man can make. He believed the wall was empty. Let me set the day for you the way I still see it, because I have turned it over so many times that it has worn smooth in my hands. It was the autumn of the king's 25th year on the throne, and the whole city of Whitcomb had gone half mad with the accession gala. There would be a week of it, a procession, a great feast in the long hall, fireworks over the river, a tournament of horses on the south meadow that the old men said would rival anything in the kingdom's memory. Ashford Palace sat at the top of the city like a crown set on a gray hill, and from every road below it the wagons came. They came for days. They came loaded with everything a celebration of that size devours: barrels of wine and oil, sacks of flour, crates of candles and cloth, hothouse flowers wrapped in damp paper, ice packed in straw, whole sides of beef, casks of salt fish, silver hired for the week, and gifts. So many gifts. Every house of standing in Havonmore, and a good many from the realms beyond our borders, sent tribute to the king's quarter century, and the tribute came in wagons, and the wagons came to my gate. The ironwood gate was the eastern way into the palace grounds, the one the trade used. The great ceremonial arch on the west face, where the king rode out and the foreign princes were received with trumpets, that was for show. The ironwood gate was for work. It was a tall double gate of black banded oak set in a wall of gray stone, and a forecourt of worn cobbles spread out before it where the wagons queued. There was a stone guardhouse to one side, and a long counter where the clerks worked their ledgers, and a place where every wagon was halted and inspected, and let through or turned away. That was the law of the gate, and it was the whole of my duty, and I want you to understand it plainly before I tell you the rest, because everything that happened that evening hangs upon it. Every wagon was opened, every one. It did not matter whose name was painted on the canvas. It did not matter how grand the seal. It did not matter if the carter wept that the ice was melting, or the flowers were wilting, or the great lord whose goods these were would have us all flogged for the delay. The clerks counted the manifest, and the guardsmen of the gate lifted the canvas and looked, and a wagon that did not match its own papers did not pass. We did not do this because we expected thieves at the king's own celebration. We did it because a gate that opens some wagons and not others is not a gate. It is a door with a price on it, and a door with a price on it is no protection at all. I had learned that lesson young in a hard place, and I will come to it, but for now only know this: I believed it the way a man believes the floor will hold him. I did not think about it any more than I thought about my own breathing. Every wagon was opened. That was the world. I stood the gate that evening with a young guardsman named Tobias Reed, who had been with us 4 months and still held himself too straight, the way new men do before they learn that the stillness comes from inside and not from clenching. He was a good lad. He watched me the way young men watch the older ones, sideways, trying to learn the thing that cannot be told. And the captain of the gate that week was a sober, careful man named Whitlock, who had risen from the ranks and never forgot it, and who kept the ledgers honest because he could not imagine keeping them any other way. I tell you their names because they mattered later. A man who means to do wrong always thinks he is alone with the one he hopes to corrupt. He never counts the witnesses. That, too, is a mistake of the powerful. They have spent so long being the only person in the room who matters that they forget the room is full of people. The light was failing by the time the trouble came, the way it fails early in our autumns, the sun going down behind the city in a long smear of gray and copper, and the lamps along the wall just then being lit by the boys with their poles. The cobbles were slick with the day's drizzle. The forecourt smelled of horse and wet stone and the smoke of the lamps. The queue of wagons stretched back out of the gate and down the eastern road farther than I could see, and the carters stamped their feet and blew on their hands and grumbled at the clerks, and the clerks grumbled back, and the work went on as it always went on, wagon by wagon. The canvas lifted, the manifest checked, the seal noted, the wagon waved through into the dark beyond the arch where the palace torches burned. And then there was a stir at the head of the line, a ripple of the kind a crowd makes when something out of the ordinary comes among it, and a carriage rolled up alongside the wagons where no carriage had any business being, because carriages went to the west arch and the wagons went to mine. It was a fine carriage, black and lacquered, with a crest on the door I did not know, a heron, I think, a long white bird against a dark field, and a pair of matched grays that were worth more than a guardsman earned in 5 years. The door opened before the step was even down, and a man stepped out into the lamplight, and from the way the carters fell silent I knew before he said a word that here was someone who was used to silence falling when he arrived. He was perhaps 50, well kept, with the kind of face that has been fed carefully its whole life. Heavy in the jaw, smooth in the cheek, with pale eyes that moved fast over everything and settled on nothing for long, the way a man's eyes move when he is always pricing what he sees. He wore a long coat of dark wool with a fur collar and rings, and his boots had never walked anywhere they had not chosen to walk. He had 2 men with him, hard, quiet men who stood a half step behind and to either side, and a clerk of his own, a thin, nervous fellow with a leather case clutched to his chest like a shield. I learned his name within the minute, because he gave it the way other men give a blow. Aldous Crane. He said it to the captain as though it were itself a kind of payment, a coin he expected to be honored. Crane. Even the new lad Reed knew the name. I felt him stiffen beside me. Crane owned ships. Crane owned warehouses on 3 rivers and a fleet on the cold sea, and the right to bring in half the silk and spice and worked silver that came to Havonmore from the south. Crane had built a house in the high quarter that men went out of their way to walk past so they could say they had seen it. Crane lent money to lords who had run through their own, and the lords smiled at him in public and hated him in private, and none of it touched him, because a man with that much of the kingdom's coin in his keeping does not need to be loved. He was, by any reckoning of money, one of the great men of the realm. And he had 3 wagons of his own in the line that night, heaped with gifts for the king's accession, and the 3rd of those wagons was the reason he had stepped out of his fine carriage into the wet, and the lamp smoke to come and speak to a guardsman at a trade gate. He just did not say so yet. The powerful never say so yet. He spoke first to Whitlock, the captain, all warmth, all ease. He said what a magnificent occasion it was, what an honor to bring his small tribute to so beloved a king, how he hoped the gala would be remembered for 100 years. He said it the way a man pours oil smoothly, watching it spread. And Whitlock, who was a careful man, thanked him for his loyalty and asked, in the plain way of the gate, for the manifests of his 3 wagons so that they might be checked and passed. And there it was, the first small catch in the smoothness, the first place the oil did not flow. Crane's clerk handed over 2 sets of papers readily enough. The 3rd he held a beat too long, and Crane's pale eyes flicked to me, standing the inner post by the gate itself, the man who would lift the canvas, and something in him decided in that instant that the captain was the wrong man to work and the guardsman was the right one. Captains keep ledgers. Guardsmen lift canvas. If you want a wagon through unseen, it is the hand on the canvas you must buy. So he left Whitlock to the papers and the clerks, and he came to me. I want to be honest about what I felt, because in the retelling men make themselves into iron all the way through, and that is a lie that does the young no good. I was not unmoved inside. I knew The moment his eyes settled on me and stayed, that I was about to be tested in the way I had been dreading my whole career without ever quite admitting it. I had stood against drunkards and bullies and entitled fools, and that is a contest of patience, nothing more. You outlast a fool. But a clever rich man who has decided to buy you is a different storm, and I felt the old cold come up through my chest the way it had come up only once or twice before in 30 years. I kept my face still. I kept my eyes forward, over his head, at the lamps in the dark. I had been doing that for so long that it cost me nothing on the outside. On the inside I gathered myself, the way you gather yourself before a wave you have seen coming for a long way out. He came and stood close, closer than a stranger has any business standing, so that the fur of his collar was almost at my shoulder and his voice could drop low and be only for me. And he began, as such men always begin, with kindness. That is the first thing they teach you nowhere and you learn everywhere. The buying does not start with the coin. It starts with the kindness. The coin comes later when the kindness has softened the ground. He told me I looked tired. He said it gently, almost with concern, the way a man speaks to someone he has decided to be fond of. He said the gate must be a cold post on a night like this, a long post, a thankless one. He said he had watched me stand there as still as the stone behind me, and that he admired discipline, that he had built everything he had on discipline, that a man who could stand as I stood was wasted at a gate. He said all of it looking at the side of my face, watching for the small softening that tells a buyer the ground is ready. I gave him none. I looked at the lamps. I breathed slow. Then he moved to the second thing, which is the gift that is not yet a gift. He said a man like me ought to be at ease in his later years, not standing in the wet at 50, 60, until his knees gave out and they pensionied him off to a cold room and a thin loaf. He said he had men in his houses who had served him 20 years and wanted for nothing, who had a fire and a full table and grandchildren on their knees. He spoke of my family then, though I had told him nothing of a family. He had guessed, or had it guessed for him, that a man my age had people. He said it would be a fine thing for a man's children not to have to scrape. He said it would be a fine thing to know they were provided for, whatever became of him. And here, you understand, he had still offered me nothing. He had only drawn a warm room and a full table in the air between us and let me look at it. That is the opium of it. They do not hand you the pipe. They let you smell the smoke and watch your own hunger lean toward it. I did not answer him because the gate does not converse. A guardsman at his post speaks only what duty requires: to halt a wagon, to ask for papers, to give an order. To everything else he is stone. I had answered 1,000 fools with that stone and never felt the cost of it. I felt the cost of it now because his words were not foolish. They were aimed. He had found, with a stranger's quickness, the two soft places every man has at 50, the fear of being discarded, and the wish to leave his children better than he found them, and he had pressed a gentle thumb to both. I felt them ache. I will not pretend I did not. But I had a thing in me older and harder than either ache, and his thumb could not reach it, and so I stood and looked at the lamps and let his warm room dissolve in the cold air where he had drawn it. When the kindness did not move me, he came to the coin. They always do. The kindness is the door, but the coin is the room they mean to put you in. He did it cleverly. He did not pull out a purse in the lamplight where the clerks could see. His nervous clerk stepped near, and the leather case opened just enough, low between Crane's body and mine, angled so that only I could see in. And inside it was money of a kind I had not in my life held, not the worn silver of a guardsman's pay, but heavy gold new struck, a great deal of it, more than the gate paid me in a decade, more than my father had earned in his whole life of honest work. It sat there in the lamplight, dull and warm, and Crane's low voice told me almost tenderly that it was a gift between friends, that there was no shame in a gift, that the third wagon was only flowers and fine cloth and a few cases of his own good wine, family things, sentimental, that he simply could not bear to have rough hands paw through and crush on a night so dear to him. He asked only that the third wagon pass as it was. He said the word as though it weighed nothing. As it was. And there it was, you see, the whole of it, stripped of the kindness and the warm room and the friendship. It was the oldest transaction in the world. He had a wagon he did not want opened, and he believed that every man who lifts canvas can be made to leave one canvas down for the right weight of gold. He believed it because in his life it had always been true. He had bought clerks and captains and judges, and for all I know, lords. He had bought the labor of half the river and the silence of the other half. He stood there in the lamp smoke utterly certain, with the serene certainty of a man who has never once met a price he could not pay, that the only question between us was the size of the heap. And I want you to hear me clearly when I tell you what I was thinking behind that still face, because it is the truest thing I know. I was not tempted. People do not believe that. Young Reed did not believe it when he asked me afterward. They think the difference between an honest man and a bought one is that the honest man wrestles his hunger to the ground and pins it, and the bought one loses the bout. But that was not it. By the time Crane opened his case to me, I had no bout to fight, because I had fought it once, all the way to the bottom, 30 years before and a long way from that gate, and a man does not fight the same war twice if he wins it the first time. I will tell you since I have told you everything else. When I was a young soldier, younger than Reed, I served on a frontier post far to the north, a poor cold place at the head of a mountain road where the smuggling came through. The man who held the post above me, a sergeant, was bought. I did not know it then. I knew only that he was easy and well liked, and never short of small luxuries, and that certain wagons came up the road at certain hours, and he turned and looked at the mountains until they had passed. I thought him a generous man who did not trouble himself with small things. And one of those wagons he did not trouble to stop carried what wagons in that country carried under the hay, and it went down into the valley behind us, into a town that trusted the post above it to be a wall, and what that wagon brought into the town killed people. Not soldiers, not the men who play the game. It killed a baker and the baker's 2 sons and an old woman who sold eggs, and others in a fire set to cover a robbery, with weapons that should never have passed the post if the post had been a wall instead of a door with a price on it. I was 18. I helped carry them out. I have carried them out in my mind every day since. And standing in the cold ash of that town, I made the only vow of my life that I have never once bent, which is that no wagon would ever pass a gate I held because the man behind it could pay. I did not make it out of goodness. I want to be plain. I made it out of the faces in the ash, which I could not bear to add to. Goodness is a fine word for it afterward. At the time it was only that I could not carry any more of them. So Aldous Crane opened his case of gold to me, and what he was truly asking, though he did not know it, was that I help him carry a wagon I had not seen past a wall that other people were trusting to hold, on the strength of his promise that it was only flowers. And I had heard a man's promise that it was only flowers once before, more or less, in the mouth of a smiling sergeant looking at the mountains. And I had carried the cost of that promise out of a burning town with my own hands. He could have shown me the weight of the world in new gold, and it would have weighed exactly nothing against that. The case meant nothing. I was not refusing his money. I had refused it 30 years before he was ever born to me, and he simply had the bad fortune to be the man who arrived after the decision was already made. I did the only thing the gate permits. I said, in the level voice we keep for the work, that every wagon to the palace would be opened, and that I would ask him to stand aside so that the inspection of his wagons might proceed in order with the rest. That was all. It was not defiance. It was the law of the gate spoken aloud, the same words I had said to 100 carters that very evening. But I think Aldous Crane had not been told no, plainly and without softening, by a man who could not be moved, in a very long time, and the words landed on him like a slap, and I watched the warm, friendly thing in his face go out like a lamp pinched between 2 fingers. That was the turn. That was where the opium ran out and the stick came up. I have thought a great deal in the years since about how fast it happened, and how complete the change was, because it taught me more about the man than all his kindness had. A man who is truly generous, who truly admires discipline, who truly wishes a tired old guardsman a warm fire in his last years. That man refused, is disappointed but not transformed. He shrugs, perhaps he is a little hurt, he goes on. But the kindness had been a tool, and when the tool failed he set it down without a flicker, the way a workman sets down a chisel that has not bitten and reaches for the hammer. There was no disappointment in him. There was only a recalculation. The price had not worked. Very well. There was another lever and he reached for it, and the second lever was fear. He stepped closer still, and his low voice lost its warmth and kept its lowness, which is a worse thing than a shout. A shout is for the crowd. A low, cold voice is for you alone, and it means the man has stopped performing and started working. He told me he knew my captain. He named Whitlock and named the man above Whitlock, the master of the household guard, and named with a small, precise smile 2 men of the king's own council whom he dined with, he said, more nights than not. He told me that men who served the household were appointed at the pleasure of those councils, and that pleasure was a delicate thing, easily lost. He told me he would remember my face. He said it slowly. I will remember your face. He told me that a guardsman who made an enemy of a man like him would find his post gone within the month, his name a quiet word passed among the people who decide such things, his pension reviewed, his small, honest comforts examined. And then, because the warm room he had drawn for my family had not bought me, he drew a colder room in the same air and put my family in that one. He did not threaten them with harm. He was too careful for that, and there were too many ears, and a man does not survive to be Aldous Crane by saying the thing that hangs him. He only said, gently, terribly, that it would grieve him to see good people suffer for one man's stubbornness, that children should not pay for a father's pride, that I should think very carefully, for their sake, about whether one wagon of flowers was worth all that I had. I will tell you that the stick reached deeper than the opium had. The gold had meant nothing because I had refused it long ago, but a threat to the people I loved was a new thing, aimed at a new place, and it found a place that was not stone. I felt my heart go hard and fast behind the still face. I felt the old soldier in me, the one who had carried the dead out of the ash, want very much to put my hands on this smooth-fed man and remind him what hands are for. That is the truth, and any guardsman who tells you he never once wanted to break his stillness and answer with his body is lying to you or has never been truly provoked. The wanting is not the failing. The wanting is the proof that you are a man and not actually stone. The discipline is what you do with the wanting. And what the gate had taught me over 30 years was that my hands were not the answer to anything, that the moment a guardsman lifts his hands he has lost. He has made it about himself, about his pride, about his temper, and he has handed the powerful man exactly the story the powerful man wants, the story of the brute in the uniform who could not control himself. The guardsman's whole power, his only power, is that he does not move. He stands. He lets the storm break against him and run off the stone and away, and the storm, having broken, has nowhere to go but down, and it goes down every time if only the stone will hold long enough. So I held. I did the hardest thing I had done in 30 years of standing, which was nothing. I did not put my hands on him. I did not raise my voice. I did not even let my breathing change, though I wanted to, though every part of me wanted to. I looked over his head at the lamps along the wall and the dark beyond them, and I said again, in the same level voice, the same 11 words I had said before, that every wagon to the palace would be opened, and that I would ask him to stand aside. And here is the thing that men who have never stood a gate do not understand, the thing I most want the young ones to know. He had no answer to that. He had the whole weight of his fortune and his friends and his fear, and against a wall that simply repeated the law and did not argue, all of it was wasted. You cannot bargain with a man who will not bargain. You cannot frighten a man into an argument he refuses to have. He had come prepared to win a negotiation, and I had declined to hold one. There was nothing for his gold to land on and nothing for his threats to bend. He had brought a key to a door that had no lock, only a hinge, and the hinge swung one way, toward open, every time. And slowly, in the lamplight, I saw the certainty go out of his pale eyes, and behind it come the first cold touch of the only thing such men truly fear, which is not loss of money and not even loss of friends, but the dawning sense that they have, for the first time in a long time, lost control of the room. Because the room was not ours alone, you see. It never had been. While Aldous Crane bent close to me and poured first his oil and then his poison, the gate had gone on being the gate around us. Captain Whitlock had finished the papers of the first 2 wagons and come to stand near, close enough to hear, because a captain who is worth the name does not leave a guardsman alone with a great man for long. The clerks had paused over their ledgers. Reed, the young one, stood at his post a few feet off, white-faced, having heard every word, his hands trembling on his rifle not from fear of Crane, but from the fury a decent young man feels when he watches someone try to buy his elder like a sack of flour. The carters in the queue had gone quiet and were watching, and up on the wall, 2 of the boys who lit the lamps had stopped with their poles and were looking down. Crane had performed his whole business, the kindness, the gold, the threat, in the belief that it was a private transaction between a buyer and a single bought man. He had forgotten the room. He had been the only person who mattered for so long that he had genuinely forgotten the gate was full of people, and that people have ears, and that ears remember, and that the law of the gate was not mine to bend even if I had wished to, because it was written in Whitlock's ledger and watched by 20 pairs of eyes and waiting just then for 1 wagon to be opened. Whitlock stepped forward into the lamplight, and his voice was not low and not loud, only flat, the voice of a man stating a fact. He said the inspection would proceed. He said it to Crane, and he said it as captain of the gate, and he said it, I noticed, loudly enough that the clerks and the carters and the lamp boys could all hear that it had been said. Whitlock was a careful man. He had heard enough, I think, to understand exactly what had been attempted, and a careful man who has heard an attempt at bribery does not whisper afterward. He says the law out loud in front of witnesses, so that there can never be a question later about what was offered and what was answered. Crane turned on him. The mask was off now, all of it, and the man beneath was uglier than I had expected and smaller somehow, despite the fine coat and the fur. He blustered. He named his names again, louder this time, the council men, the master of the guard, daring Whitlock to risk his career over a wagon of flowers. He demanded that the 3rd wagon be passed at once, with his seal on his word as a gentleman, and that the insolent guardsman, he meant me, be removed from his post that very night. He threatened the captain with everything he had threatened me with and more, because he had more to lose now, and a man with more to lose threatens harder. And Whitlock, to his great and lasting credit, simply waited until the noise ran down, the way I had waited, because Whitlock had learned the same thing I had learned, that you do not argue with the storm, you let it spend itself. And when it had spent itself, he said, in the same flat voice, that the 3rd wagon would now be opened, and that he would ask Mr. Crane and his men to step well back while it was. I have seen men face ruin in many shapes over the years, but I have rarely seen the exact moment a man understands that the thing he has spent everything to prevent is going to happen anyway, and there is nothing left in his great store of money and influence to stop it. It is a particular stillness that comes over them, quite different from mine. Mine was a discipline held. Theirs is a collapse paused, a man going very quiet because the noise inside him has become too large to let out. Crane went that kind of still. His clerk had gone the color of the wet cobbles. His 2 hard men shifted their weight and looked, for the first time, uncertain, the way hired men look when they realize the trouble has grown larger than what they are paid to handle. And I knew then, with a cold certainty of my own, that there were not flowers in that wagon. A man does not offer 10 years of a guardsman's pay and then threaten his children over flowers. The size of the bribe is the size of the secret. I had known it from the moment the case opened. Now everyone at the gate knew it, because Aldous Crane's face was telling them, plainer than any confession. Whitlock gave the order, and Reed and another guardsman went to the 3rd wagon, and I held my post at the gate itself, because that was my place, and a guardsman does not leave his place even when every part of him wants to see. I watched from where I stood. They put back the canvas. Beneath it was exactly what Crane had said: cases of wine, bolts of fine southern cloth, baskets of hothouse flowers already drooping in the cold. For a moment, a long moment, it looked as though the great fuss had been over nothing, and I felt the eyes of the carters and the clerks slide toward me with the beginning of doubt, wondering if the old guardsman had made a mountain of a wealthy man's harmless pride. I did not move. I waited, because a wagon is not its top layer, and a man who has spent a fortune to keep a wagon closed has not hidden his secret where the first hand will find it. It was Reed who found it, the young one, and I have always been glad it was Reed, because it gave him in his 4th month a thing it takes some guardsmen a whole career to learn, that the law of the gate is not a small thing or a stubborn thing, that it is the difference between a wall and a door with a price on it, and that holding it is worth whatever it costs. He found that the wagon's bed was false. The floor of it sat too high. The boards beneath the wine cases gave a hollow sound when he rapped them, and when he and the other man drew up the false floor there was a long shallow space beneath, packed and padded, and in it, wrapped in oiled cloth, was not flowers and not wine. I will not pretend I could see clearly from the gate what came out of that wagon, and I will not embroider it the way the story got embroidered later in the taverns of Whitcomb, whereby Midwinter Crane was smuggling out the crown jewels themselves. What I saw, and what the captain's report set down plainly, was treasure, worked silver and gold, old pieces, ceremonial things, the kind of objects that belong to a kingdom and not to a man. They were palace pieces. They had been going the wrong way. That was the thing it took the council a week to fully untangle, and it is the thing that turned a smuggler into something worse. The wagons of tribute had been flowing in for days, hundreds of them in a great river of canvas, and Aldous Crane had seen in that river the perfect cover, not to bring something in, but to take something out. In all that coming and going, who would mark one of his wagons leaving heavier than the manifest, in the chaos of a week-long gala, if only the hand at the gate would leave one canvas down? He had found a way into the palace stores, through bought servants higher up than any of us, and the ironwood gate was the last wall between him and clear escape down the eastern road, and at that last wall he had run, after all his cleverness, into the one thing his money could not move. A guardsman who would open every wagon. It came apart for him very fast after that, the way these things do. All the slow, careful years of a great fortune undone in the time it takes to lift a false floor. Whitlock had the gate sealed. The mounted constables who patrolled the palace roads were summoned, and they came at a hard trot with their lamps swinging, and the forecourt that had been a place of grumbling carters became, in a quarter hour, a place of arrest. Crane's hard men gave up their weapons without a fight. They had not signed on for treason, and they knew the difference between a brawl at a gate and the rope, and they wanted no part of the second. The nervous clerk wept and talked, and could not stop talking, and what he said in the first 10 minutes was enough to hang his master twice over. And Aldous Crane himself, the great man, the man who lent money to lords and built a house men crossed the city to see, stood in the cold lamplight of a trade gate with his fur collar and his rings, and watched his whole life come down, and said nothing at all, because there was nothing his low, cold voice could buy from the men who held him now. He looked at me once before they took him. I had not moved from my post through any of it. I stood the gate while the constables did their work, because the gate must be held even on the night its holding has just saved a kingdom's treasure, perhaps especially on that night. He found me with his pale eyes across the forecourt, and I will tell you the truth of what was in them, because I have wondered about it ever since. It was not hatred, though I had expected hatred. It was bewilderment. Real, deep bewilderment, the look of a man who has spent 50 years certain of one great rule about the world and has just watched the rule fail and cannot understand how. He had believed with his whole being that every man has a price. It was not a cynicism to him. It was a law of nature, as sure as the gold being heavy. And he had just met a man at a gate who did not, and it had broken him on the rock of it, and he could not understand it, and he looked at me as though I were a thing that should not be able to exist. I held his look a moment over the heads of the constables, and then I returned my eyes to the dark beyond the lamps where they belonged, and that was the last I ever saw of him with his freedom. They took him down the eastern road in a closed wagon of their own, which I have always thought was a fitting thing, that the man who had tried to hide in a wagon should leave in one. The carts of tribute that had backed up behind his carriage were waved on through, one by one, opened and checked and passed, all through the long cold night, because the gala did not stop for one man's ruin, and the wagons kept coming, and the gate kept doing what the gate does. I stood it until my relief came near dawn, and then I went to my cold room and slept, and the next day I stood it again. There were no trumpets for the gate. There never are. The West Arch gets the trumpets. The Ironwood Gate gets the wagons. That is as it should be. It came out over the following weeks, in the way these things come out, that Crane's reach had gone higher than any of us at the gate could have guessed, that there were servants of the household and at least one man near the council who had taken his gold and helped him into the stores, and that the loss, had that third wagon gone down the eastern road that night, would have been a wound to the kingdom's honor as much as its purse. The king robbed in the very week the kingdom gathered to celebrate him. Men came to the gate to ask me about it, clever men with questions, and I answered them plainly and told them only what I had seen and heard, and I let the heap of gold and the threats and the law of the gate speak for themselves, because they spoke better than I could. The thing that hanged Aldous Crane in the end was not only the treasure under the false floor. It was the bribe and the threats themselves, heard by a captain and a guardsman and a frightened young recruit, and a row of carters and 2 boys with lamp poles, every one of whom remembered, and every one of whom said the same thing under oath. Because it had happened in the open in front of all of them, he had forgotten the room. To the very end, he had counted only himself. I want to finish with the young one, with Reed, because it is for the young ones that a man tells a story like this at all. A few nights after, when the gala was done and the wagons had thinned and the gate was quiet again, Reed stood beside me on a long watch, and for a while he said nothing, and then he asked me the question I had known he would ask, the question they all ask eventually if they are any good. He asked how I had done it. Not how I had caught Crane, anyone could see how, the false floor told that plainly. He asked how I had stood there with all that gold a hand's breadth from me, more than either of us would see in a lifetime, with my family threatened and my post threatened, and the man so sure and so smooth, and felt nothing, and not bent. He asked it the way the young ask such things, as though there must be a trick to it, a strength they could train into themselves like the stillness of the body, if only an older man would tell them the secret of it. And I told him the truth, which is that there is no trick, and that the strength he imagined was not what had held me at all. I told him that a man who decides, fresh in the moment, with the gold in front of him and the storm on him, whether or not he can be bought, is a man already half sold, because the deciding is the bargaining, and the bargaining is the beginning of the fall. I told him that you cannot win that contest in the lamplight of the gate. You can only win it long before, somewhere quiet, once, all the way to the bottom, and then carry the winning with you so that when the gold comes you have nothing left to decide. I did not tell him about the ash and the baker's sons that night. That came later when he was ready for it. I only told him that the one man at that gate who could not be bought had looked, by every measure Crane could see, like the cheapest man there, old, plain, on a guardsman's pay, standing in the wet for the wage of a single sack of his fine wine. And that this was the whole joke of it, and the whole truth of it, that the cheapest-looking man at the gate was the one thing in the whole kingdom that all of Aldous Crane's fortune could not afford. Reed thought about that for a long while in the dark, the way a good young man thinks about a thing he means to keep. And then he straightened at his post, not the clenched straightness of the new recruit but something quieter and more settled, and we stood the rest of the watch in silence, the 2 of us, looking out past the lamps at the dark eastern road where the wagons would come again at dawn. People still ask me whether it was hard, those 30 years of standing still. They mean the cold and the heat and the long hours, and to that I say no, the body learns. But there was one night when it was hard in the way they never mean, hard in the only way that matters, when a clever man offered me everything and then threatened me with everything to make me leave one canvas down. And I have thought about that night more than any other, and what I have come to is this. They will tell you that every man has his price, and they will say it as though it were wisdom, as though it were the plain truth of the world that the rest of us are too soft to admit. Do not believe them. It is the one lie the powerful most need the rest of us to swallow, because the day we stop believing it, their gold goes quiet in their hands and their threats blow past us like cold air, and they are left standing in the lamplight, bewildered, at a gate they cannot open, in front of a man who will not move. I held one gate in one kingdom for 30 years, and the proudest thing I can say of all that standing is the smallest. Every wagon was opened, every one.